history, apologetics, and current events. From the Housetops, coming up next.
Welcome to From the Housetops. I'm your host, Brother Matthew. This week we'll be turning to the From the Housetops issue featuring the life of St. Ignatius Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits. Surmounting a breach in the citadel wall of Pamplona, Navarre, Ignatius Loyola, sword in hand, stood unflinching in the face of his mortal enemies. The year was 1521. Ignatius was a 30-year-old Basque from Spain, a seasoned soldier in the service of Charles V, successor of King Ferdinand. Having served as a page to the king in his early youth, Ignatius followed the example of his 8 brothers and pledged his service to the king's army. Valor and loyalty were inbred virtues of a Loyola. In 1519, Charles V had been elected Holy Roman Emperor and was obliged to go to Germany. In the emperor's absence, his formidable and jealous enemy, Francis I of France, sought to regain lost territory and declared war to recover Navarre in Spain. Heeding the call to arms, Ignatius rushed to the scene of the battle, only to find that the townspeople, despairing of victory, had opened the gates to the French. Ignatius, with only 1 soldier, retreated to the citadel to encourage the wavering garrison. As Ignatius lighted upon the breach in the wall, his military career suddenly came to a jolting halt. A cannonball burst in, ricocheted off the wall, and struck Loyola, seriously bruising one leg and shattering the bones in the other. The enemy had conquered. The war was over, or so he thought. As the French scrambled into their conquered land, they discovered, crumpled in pain, the hero who had dared to resist them in the face of insurmountable odds. These Christian soldiers treated Ignatius with great compassion and kindness. They quickly set his shattered bones as best they could and transported him to his own home, the castle of Loyola. One war had ended for Ignatius, and another war was about to begin. The next war Ignatius was unsuspectingly to engage in was to be fought between what he later called the 2 standards. They are the spirit of Christ and the spirit of the world, and every man must choose between these 2 irreconcilable enemies. As Ignatius lay on his bed of pain, the 2 standards in his soul aligned themselves for a fierce battle. When the family physicians were called in, it didn't take them long to discover the poor job of bone setting that the French had done in their battlefield haste. Surgeons were summoned to break and reset the fractures. In true soldier fashion, Ignatius, during the whole procedure, showed little more than the clenching of his fist in pain. Unexpectedly, a few days later, a violent fever set in and grew worse as the days wore on. Soon the doctors despaired of the efficacy of their remedies and gave up all hope, declaring that the patient could not survive the night. The last rites were administered, but Ignatius stubbornly held on to life. Reduced to absolute despair in earthly help, he had recourse to prayer, calling on St. Peter, his favorite saint. That night he dreamt the saint stood at his bedside and touched him. In the morning, the doctors, to their great surprise and relief, found him on his way to recovery. But the fallen knight in shining armor soon forgot his miraculous recovery and convalesced slowly, dreaming of the day when he would continue his worldly pursuits. At last, rising many weeks later, he discovered he could no longer wear his fashionable riding boots because of his injured leg. The damaged bone had deformed in the healing process to a jutting protrusion, preventing the boot from fitting. To make matters worse, one leg was now considerably shorter than the other. Ignatius's vanity was aroused. He was a promising soldier, and he would not suffer himself to be reduced to a sight to be pitied or mocked. Against the better judgment of the family physicians and the pleading of his relatives, Ignatius subjected himself to the surgeons. They sawed away the protrusion and reset the bones, applying heavy weights to stretch the leg back to its proper length. All this he suffered a 3rd time, without a murmur, much to the admiration of his family. But suffering is not necessarily meritorious, especially if it is born from motives of vanity and self-love. St. Ignatius's recovery was far from speedy. Most of his days were spent daydreaming of conquest and of court life. Soon the monotony began to wear heavily on him, and he requested some novels of romance to read. There were only 2 books, however, to be found in the castle of Loyola. Neither was a novel. One was The Life of Christ by Ludolf the Carthusian, and the other was a compilation of the lives of the saints, including in it the life of St. Francis and St. Dominic. Ignatius began to read these books, stopping now and then to dream of his return to the life of a knight-errant, and suddenly a conflict began to make itself felt in his soul. Enthralled with the stories of the saints, he began to envision himself following in their footsteps. He pictured himself single-purposed and untrammeled in poverty, leading a life of holy abstention, now as a hermit, now as a pilgrim, trudging off to the Holy Land. As these thoughts occurred over and over again, he began to realize they left him with a sweet feeling of the eternal, touching his very soul. He alternated these thoughts with his worldly desires. But all of his daydreams of worldly pomp and splendor left him with a then what feeling, a sense of hollow accomplishment. He began to sort the 2 feelings out in his mind, wondering why the idea of imitating the obscurity of the saints delighted him almost unlimitedly, while the dream of outlandish feats of momentary bravado now left him still yearning. Over and over again the battle of thoughts raged in his soul. Exhausted by these mental encounters, Ignatius finally yielded sway to the eternal over the temporal. The first thing Ignatius did, even before his total recovery, was to begin to mortify himself, controlling natural impulses and wants by self-denial. He filled the rest of the time with prayer, developing an inner union with Christ, praising, petitioning, and repenting with copious tears. Finally, one night, he climaxed his new commitment by prostrating himself on the floor at the foot of a painting of Our Lady. There he consecrated himself to the service of our Lord under the patronage of our Blessed Mother. In true knightly fashion, he vowed inviolable fidelity. The Loyola family, like all worldly families, would never understand the sudden change in Ignatius. Confined by social fears, Ignatius's brothers tried to dissuade him from throwing away his comfortable and promising career in the kingdom. He had resolved to leave all to gain all. This the world would never understand. Ignatius left home on a pretense in order to alleviate his brothers' apprehensions. Halfway out of the town, he dismissed the 2 servants that his brother sent to accompany him. He then set out for the Benedictine Abbey of Montserrat. There, high on a hill, dwelt 300 monks. This monastery was well known for its holiness. Upon reaching the top of the mountain, Ignatius searched out from among the monks a director who was renowned for holiness. For 3 days, amid tears of contrition, he told the sins of his whole life as far as he could remember. This is called a general confession, and enables one to plumb the depths of his soul and to realize his value in God's sight and his entire dependence on God. At the end of the 3 days, Ignatius was as clean spiritually as a newly baptized baby. Having bought a coarsely woven cloak of penitential material, sandals, and a pilgrim's staff, Ignatius was about to set off on his pilgrimage. First, he made a perpetual vow of chastity. Then on March 22nd, 1522, at the age of 31, he hung his sword near the altar at Montserrat, forever renouncing the secular warfare and engaging in the spiritual. His next destination was a town called Manresa. When he arrived, he took up residence with the Dominicans. They ran a hospital, and that is where he lived, helping the sick, praying and begging his bread. His enthusiasm for this new life of penance and prayer was incredible. Unimpeded during his first fervor, Ignatius sought to make up for his past sins, especially those of vanity and want of attention. The general populace of the 1500s were tolerant and understanding of the poor begging in local streets. Children, however, were as children of all ages, and they took up taunting this new beggar and calling him names. It wasn't long until the story of the beggar in the next town who had received a set of new clothes from some hidden nobleman reached Manresa. Ignatius became alarmed lest he be discovered and his much-desired obscurity destroyed. He then withdrew to the outskirts of the village to hide and do penance in a nearby cave. In an impulse of enthusiasm, he had increased his penitential life and was found half dead from fasting. He was brought back by the Dominicans to their hospital. And then scruples, phantoms of past sins, returned over and over again to haunt him, though these sins had been forgiven by the priest in confession. Driven almost to madness, Ignatius even contemplated suicide, stopping only at the thought of eternal damnation. How many tormented hours Ignatius suffered, we will never know. The devil assailed him to desert his new life. How will you be able to support an existence full of sacrifices for the next 70 years of life that yet remain? This was the constant query that the devil taunted him with. Can you even promise me one more hour of life? Was Ignatius's reply. His scruples finally ended through the advice of a good confessor.
From the Housetops is a Catholic periodical dedicated to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Its purpose is to proclaim the faith clearly and without compromise. Each issue of From the Housetops offers the priceless truth and wisdom of the Catholic faith through inspirational lives of the saints and timeless treasures of Catholic doctrine. To get subscription information, back issues, and a free copy, go to saintbenedict.com, S-A-I-N-T, benedict.com, and look for From the Housetops. We'll be back with more From the Housetops after this break.
Hello friends, this is Father Wade Menezes with the Fathers of Mercy and EWTN, and I want to thank you for listening to Queen of Perpetual Help Radio, WQPH 89.3 FM.
On the WQPH community calendar.
You're invited to the first ever Regina Coelum Clinic fundraiser with special guest speaker Maria Ensler. This event will take place on Thursday, September 24th at 6 p.m. at St. Andre Bessette Parish Hall, 31 Guilford Ave in Laconia, New Hampshire. Attend this special fundraiser, which features a spaghetti dinner and program, raising money for this worthy cause, which aims to bring people to the heart of Christ while providing life-affirming restorative medical care. Tickets are $20 per person. Doors open at 5:30 p.m. And you may call for tickets at 603-409-6187. It's 603-409-6187. It's the Regina Coelum Clinic fundraiser, Thursday, September 24th.
So we're here at Sacred Hearts Church, and I ran into a very dear friend, Deacon Patino. Deacon, you know, it's the summer and people's faith is getting cold while the heat is coming. What can people do to stimulate and rise up their level of love for God in the summer when it's so hot?
I think that the most important thing right now is to become closer to the Eucharist, to Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament. For those Catholics that have fallen away, for those Catholics that want to find a reason why to come to church, the best and the greatest gift that the Lord has given to us is His presence, body, soul, and divinity in the Holy Eucharist. So I encourage all of you to come before Jesus in the presence, in the tabernacle, and talk to Him, and let Him talk to you. Jesus wants to hear you. So I invite all of you to come before the Blessed Sacrament and pray and talk to Him and tell Him how much you love Him. God bless you all.
And other things that are going on, Marianne, at WQPHradio.org is we have been on the air for quite a long time, but we are running into some issues with our funding, and we had some unexpected expenses that have put us in a place where we are looking for some support. So how can they do that if they want to support WQPH? We are EWTN affiliate, and we have a lot of local programming, and those people do not get paid for the work that they do. They are doing this to help with the mission of WQPH and EWTN. Marianne, how can they help?
Okay, you can help, as Connie Murphy would say. He's deceased now, he's with Jesus. Ask all of you if you can give a donation. You can send it to
WQPHradio.org. You can click on the donate button. We take PayPal, we take Venmo, we take good old-fashioned credit cards. But we also ask that you pray for the station, and we also have a prayer wall in which you can pray for your loved ones as well on our prayer wall at wqphradio.org. And Peter and Jemmy does a show called Your Prayer Intentions, and he reads some of those prayers, and we all pray for people that really are suffering and they really need our help.
Yes, and also the other way you can help the station is, as Jeannie said, pray for our station, pray for our priests. We need more vocations. We are discerning who now. If you have an idea, like Father Leonard came here, and we had a day retreat with him. That was spectacular, right?
Yes, it was an amazing weekend. And you can still go on YouTube and you can see how his wonderful trip went on the outside and inside the friary. He has a channel, and it's dedicated to what he does inside the friary and the trips he takes. And on wqphradio.org, we did post that video on what he did on his long weekend with us.
Yeah, we'd like to have him come back again, but he's a very busy priest.
So we're thinking about who might be next for us to host, and we thought about a few names, one of them being Chris Alar.
So if you have a suggestion, we'd love to hear. You can email us at our website
at wqphradio.org. Thank you so much, and thank you for listening. We're so glad you're here.
Ignatius remained at Manresa 1 year. That year was a major step in his spiritual formation in religious life. One historian writes, Ignatius learned more about divine mysteries by prayer in 1 hour at Manresa than all the doctors of the schools could teach him. Ignatius by now was an accomplished master, and soon made another spiritual discovery. It is not enough, he said, that I serve the Lord. All hearts ought to love him, and all tongues ought to praise him. This was his mission, to go out and preach to all nations. Before leaving Manresa, he compiled his famous book, The Spiritual Exercises. This little book was an exciting spiritual discovery of tremendous value in the upheaval of the 16th century. Innovative, it refreshed the whole concept of meditation, breaking the thoughts into understandable and organized concepts. Directing souls through the exercises takes 30 days of silent reflection, prayer, and meditation. These insights were no doubt accumulated during his many experiences at Montserrat and Manresa. This new approach would revolutionize spiritual direction, helping to purge a stale and sinking world, reviving its vitality and health. Having left Manresa, Ignatius trudged through Italy begging as he went. Finally, he reached his long-sought destination, the Holy Land. Having visited all the holy places, he realized that his pilgrimage was at an end. He dreamed, however, of remaining there, preaching and converting the infidels. But this dream was soon shattered. The Franciscan guardian of the Holy Land told him he did not think it was God's will that he stay. Ignatius challenged the decision, whereupon the Franciscan provincial threatened him with excommunication if he did not leave. Of 3 ships in port, only the smallest allowed Ignatius free passage to return to Europe. The other 2 were reported lost at sea on their attempted return. Arriving in Europe during January of 1524, Ignatius began to study for the priesthood in Barcelona, Spain. It was not easy for him to begin the life of a student at the age of 33. Enduring the jeers and taunts of younger students, Ignatius's mind would wander off to God, making it impossible to learn. He was on fire with zeal to lead other souls to Christ. Spiritually advising many of his acquaintances, he led them also into the battle for souls by directing them through the spiritual exercises. The overwhelming success of this technique brought the watchful attention of the Inquisition upon himself. At this time, Germany was being swept by a whirlwind of heresy fanned by Luther and his followers. The whole of Europe, in fact, was bubbling with discontent and heresies, sparked in part by the lax morals of the clergy. The leaders of the heresies, playing on the discontent and disillusionment of the people, lured many victims into their web of rebellion. A frail and human institution was set up to try to safeguard the faithful from falling into error. This institution was called the Inquisition. As an official machine of the Church, it would investigate anyone thought to contribute to the downfall of Christian beliefs and values. The spiritual exercises of Ignatius did not escape its watchful eye. 8 times Ignatius was called before the Inquisition. Each time Ignatius fearlessly faced the charges, knowing that he had nothing to hide. One of the criteria for suspicion was that he, not being ordained, had no credentials to preach or direct souls. But each accusation was proved false, and the integrity of his faith was publicly acknowledged. Ignatius was to complete his studies after 13 years of university life in Spain and Paris. It was in Paris that Ignatius's followers began to band together, forming a spiritual army to battle for Christ. One of Ignatius's first and faithful followers was Blessed Peter Faber, who tutored Ignatius in philosophy and later became the first priest of the order. The most illustrious of his followers, however, was the great apostle Saint Francis Xavier. When the two men met, Francis was a popular and vain student, constantly haunted by Ignatius's query, "What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his own soul?" Xavier finally gave in, abandoned his worldly life, and joined the followers of Ignatius. Francis Xavier's name now resounds through the centuries as one of the greatest preachers and missionaries of all times. On August 15th, 1534, at the age of 43, Ignatius and his 6 followers pronounced aloud perpetual vows at the chapel of Montmartre in Paris. 3 years later, Ignatius would receive holy orders in Rome. His tiny band of followers slowly grew to 10 in number. "If anyone asks us who we are, we shall answer," he said, "we are the company of Jesus." True to his early military training, Ignatius knew absolute obedience was utterly necessary if any army were to be victorious. He also knew no army would even undertake a battle if they were not convinced that their cause was urgent, and if they were not willing to give their lives for that very cause. Mediocrity would not be tolerated. "Go," he would command his followers, "and inflame the world. Spread the fire which Jesus Christ came to kindle on earth." Controversy, a word now shunned by latitudinarian concepts of religion, surrounded all their endeavors. Of course it would. The world at large has equally waged its battle, declaring war on Christ and his followers, and everywhere a skirmish takes place, there's controversy. But the soldiers of Ignatius were not afraid to meet the enemy. Mostly men of noble birth, the Jesuits, as a whole, were well educated and extremely disciplined. St. Ignatius elevated the minds and hearts through a system of learning that was Christocentric. This outlook was achieved in great part through the exercises. Ignatius had written that they were a military training, devised in stages to withdraw a man from the dominance of nature and lead him under that of grace. They prepare the mind to remove all disorderly decadences. With the training of Ignatius, his followers were able to turn the world and its distorted values and fears upside down. Ignatius once said, quote, "If there is one thing that makes me want to live longer, it is to be able to make it difficult for candidates to enter the society." End quote. They were to be a few good men, special forces in the battle for souls. It was important that the integrity of purpose be maintained by all members in the order. Although St. Ignatius and the Company of Jesus, as they had become known, lived their vows, it was 6 years after taking their vows that he wrote the rules, and 3 years after that he wrote the constitutions. By the time he had 10 members, they were already attracting notice, being called reform priests. The King of Portugal asked for 6 members. Ignatius, having only 10 at the time, could send only 2. When the society went to Rome for approval, that approval was not quickly granted. Of the 3 cardinals appointed to review the order, 2 were against approval. Nothing short of a barrage of prayers worked to change their minds. In 1540, the Pope sanctioned the Society of Jesus as an official order of the Church. Ignatius, of course, was chosen the first general, though he agreed to take the position only out of obedience to his confessor. The next years were filled with establishing houses in Rome and accomplishing works of charity. Each year the order grew. By 1555, missionaries had been sent to the East Indies, Morocco, the Congo, Abyssinia, and Portugal. 16 years after the confirmation of the society, there were 12 provinces and 100 colleges all over the world. Through his wisdom, Ignatius directed an efficient army of spiritual soldiers that would be unmatched in history. This army of Ignatius has produced 917 martyrs. These were men like himself who left all to gain all. St. Ignatius is also the spiritual father of 36 canonized saints, 150 blesseds, and 207 venerables. St. Ignatius died in 1556 on a hot Italian morning, July 31st. After a long bout with a sickness that looked more chronic than critical, St. Ignatius asked one evening that the father attending him go to the Pope and ask for his blessing. After consulting with the doctors, Father Palancus told Ignatius not to worry. He was in no danger and asked permission to finish a letter to a friend in Spain. Ignatius told Father Palancus that he would rather he get the Pope's blessing, but whatever seemed best. He would resign himself to the Father's decision. The next morning, Father Palancus found Ignatius, obviously in the throes of death. Although he attempted to obtain the papal blessing in time, Ignatius died before his return. Receive, O Lord, all my liberty, my memory, my understanding, my whole will, St. Ignatius once prayed. You have given me all that I have, all that I possess, and I surrender all to your divine will, that you may dispose of me. Give me only your love and your grace. With this I am rich enough. I have no more to ask. Now at the age of 65, after serving as general of his order for 15 years, 3 months and 9 days, Ignatius was welcomed into the heavenly courts of the king he had served so loyally and so well. He left behind an army to continue the battle for souls. St. Ignatius was canonized on March 12, 1622.
From the Housetops is produced by the Slaves of the Immaculate Heart of Mary, Still River, Massachusetts.